Hello. Good evening, comrades and friends and colleagues. Welcome to our side session where we would like to discuss this great idea about the UN Tax Convention. This side event is convened by the Norwegian Church Aid together with all its partners from South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, Botswana. I'm trying to check all of them. So this is being co-hosted by NCA and all its partners. And we also have an esteemed partner in this work, the Tax Justice Network Africa, that has been doing this work, lobbying and advocacy around the issue of the UN Tax Convention. And this evening, we would like to talk some more about that and see how that can become a reality and the pathways for us as communities, as civil society organizations to put our voice there and support Africa in terms of the UN Tax Convention. We have an esteemed panel that I will introduce, very diverse, from faith-based, parliament, civil society, EITI, the youth that are going to speak to this UN Tax Convention. NCA did a report that we're going to hear a little bit more about and launch it. We know that there is a UN resolution which was calling on the UN General Assembly to begin negotiations for a UN tax convention in 2023. And as civil society organizations working with communities that are impacted the most by mining, by illicit financial flows, we believe this could give or open opportunities for fair and equitable participation of all countries in the global tax reform discussions. We all know from where we are sitting in Africa that we're grappling with illicit financial flows and the delinquency of multinational companies in tax evasion and tax dodging, which poses huge risks to the achievement of the Agenda 2063 and to our general development and even the achievement as well of the Sustainable Development Goals. And currently, there's very limited space for Africa to participate in tax discussions. And there has been a call for more participatory and fair global tax system. We all know from where we're sitting as well that decisions about tax rights and tax revenue have been a preserve of the OECD countries for over a century. And what an opportune time that we are discussing this at the alternative mining in Daba. We know that when you talk about the IFFs, the biggest crime scene is actually the extractors sector. So it is very relevant and important for us to come up with our positions with regards to the implementation of the UN Tax Convention, for opening up, the space for decisions, for discussions around how to deal with this issue in line as well with achieving the high-level panel report recommendations that we made in 2015. So we hope that through this side event, we'll be able to raise awareness amongst ourselves on the international financial architecture and the proposed UN tax convention from my esteemed panelists and also the report that's going to be unpacked here. We're going to assess the opportunities presented by the UN tax convention, and we'll also get feedback from you and from the panel as well on discussions that have gone on since its approval. We hope at the end we'll be able to come up with a position paper, probably a communique that will then be targeted at different policymakers and solution holders and those that are pushing for the UN tax convention. So thank you very much for taking your time to come and participate in this side event. And to our panelists, thank you for making time as well. Um, at the end of this side session, we're going to have refreshments at the rooftop for those that would like to join in and network and open discussions and conversations more. So please, NCA and its partners are inviting you to join them at 8 o'clock. At this point in time, I would like to start our conversation, and we are going to start with a presentation on the report done by NCA on the UN Tax Convention. And I will invite Doug, who is the Director of Communications and Politics at NCA, to speak to us about what is coming out of the report. And you have 10 minutes. Thank you, Doug.
Thank
Your
you.
turn.
Great to see all of you. Yes, we see a world with a long list of problems. Increasing inequality, increasing poverty, hunger crisis is developing. And the amount of money the world needs to finance climate adaptation and the green transition is huge. And the lack of enough money in state budgets to fund healthcare, education, and general welfare is a severe problem all around the world. Last week, back in Norway, I heard the Norwegian State Secretary for International Development. She asked an audience, "How do you spell development finance?" And her answer was TAX. She's right. Tax is key to domestic resource mobilization everywhere. Huge amount of money are lost because of tax abuse, because of all the secrecy. It's impossible to know exactly how much the state loses. But however, leaks of documents like the Panama Papers have made it easier to estimate these numbers. In the book, The Hidden Wealth of Nations, Professor of Economics Gabriel Zuckman estimated that assets equivalent to 10% of the world's GDP were hidden in tax havens. So, Norwegian Church A, we wanted to make a report about a UN tax convention. Because such a convention can be a solution to the problems of tax abuse, the problems of countries losing their resources. And our aim is a UN tax convention that will regulate international tax issues in a comprehensive manner with the aim of getting rid of tax evasion, illegitimate transfer of profits, and other behavior that undermines states' ability to collect taxes. It's all about giving every state the possibility to secure revenues from values created in that country. It's all about taking the resources back to the societies and back to the people. So, let's make it happen. It is fitting that I'm standing here in Cape Town, talking about the steps leading up to a strong call for a UN tax convention, since one of the important milestones was the panel led by former South African President Thabo Mbeki back in 2015. And in an interview, Mbeki said, "Illicit financial flows are a challenge to us as Africans, but clearly the solution is global. We couldn't resolve this thing by just acting on our own as Africans." This point is also at the core of the report we are launching today. International tax-related problems can't be solved by every nation or every region on its own. They must be solved internationally. And the leadership of African countries have been very important in the development of the momentum for a UN tax convention. In May 22, African ministers of finance issued a joint call for a UN tax convention that was brought into the UN system. And just a few months ago, Nigeria submitted a resolution on the subject of international tax cooperation on behalf of the African group. Also mentioned in this overview of milestones is the important meeting in Addis Ababa in 2015, focusing on the systemic problems causing tax abuse, and the Panama Papers in 2015 as one example of the huge paper leaks putting tax abuse high on the public agenda. And also the FACTI panel 2 years ago, a UN expert panel with the aim of reviewing current challenges and trends related to financial accountability, transparency, and integrity. One of the panel's recommendations was to negotiate a UN tax convention. And so, in November, a resolution promoting inclusive and effective international tax cooperation was adopted by consensus at the General Assembly on the 24th of November. It decides to begin intergovernmental discussions in New York at the United Nations headquarters on ways to strengthen the inclusiveness and effectiveness of international tax cooperation. And the UN Secretary General will deliver a report analyzing all relevant international legal instruments, other documents, and recommendations that address international tax cooperation. This is just what our report is about. It is about exploring the merits and feasibility of a new international convention on tax and financial transparency. And the report is written by Norwegian Academy of International Law, and it outlines the conditions for and the key steps in a diplomatic process towards its adaptation. And it concludes that a new international convention, if well conceived and developed, could constitute an achievable and meaningful tool in the international community's efforts to tackle tax-related illicit financial flows. The report was written in 2022 and finished in September, just before the UN General Assembly and the important resolution about tax cooperation. But this only reinforces the important message highlighted by the report, that a UN tax convention is welcomed by an increasing number of states and civil society actors, and that it is feasible. Not easy, but feasible. So, everyone, where do we go from here? There are some important milestones coming up this year. In August, the UN Secretary General will deliver his report analyzing the relevant international legal instruments, documents, and recommendations that address international tax cooperation. And then later in September, the UN General Assembly takes place, and discussions about a UN tax convention will go further. And we know from similar processes, civil society plays a crucial role in influencing governments and also to build international momentum. This is something we can all be a part of. So let us use this side event to learn more from each other. I'm looking forward to hear from the participants in the excellent panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doug, for laying the foundation and the great work that NCA has done, but also showing us some of the entry points that we can explore and engage with as we do our advocacy work for the implementation of the UN Tax Convention and the opening up of space and discussion about this convention. We will now like to go to our panelists. I have a very rich and diverse panel, like I said. I have with me Mr. John Paul Kofoka from Youth for Tax Justice Africa, whom I'm going to ask some questions. We have Bishop Nelson Kisare from ISCE JIC Tanzania. We also have Miss Anne Mart Sona Sculland from NCA, who is a civil society campaigner. We have Honorable Hendricks, who is representing the African Parliamentary Network Against Illicit Financial Flows. Um, he is stepping in for Dr. Kanyisile Litchfield Chabalala, who is the chairperson of the UPNIFT. We have Mr. Gilbert Makore, right on my far right, who is the regional director for Anglophone and Lusophone Africa at EITI. So this is my panel, and I have a few questions for each of the panelists that speaks to the UN Tax Convention as it relates to each of the sectors and the work that these panelists are doing and working on. And tonight, I would like to start with you, John. I have a few questions, and my first question is really to do with why this is important for the youth. And we know that we have a very young Africa. Our demographics really show us that the youth in Africa are the largest in population in most of our countries. But there are also many challenges that the youths are facing. This has to do with the present, but also the future. We talk about the climate change, the youth bulge in Africa. What does that mean? The rising poverty and inequality that Doug was talking about. So, why would tax justice be so important and be of particular interest to the youth? And what does it really mean for the youth when we are talking about tax justice? Is it relates as well to the UN Tax Convention?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Just before I delve into the question, let me just correct you there. My name is Kafko Jonpo, and I work with Youth for Tax Justice Network. We are based in Uganda, but we are doing a lot of work around Southern Africa and East Africa. And then second, I would love to thank the organizers for sparing a place for a young person on this panel. As you can see, I think I'm, would I say the odd man out or whatever? But I am very privileged, and I'm very thankful to the organizers for, having a young person to come and share their thoughts. Now, just to get into your question, Madam Moderator, what does tax justice mean for us as young people? Perhaps to answer this question, I would love to first define what tax justice is. We could be hearing tax justice, but when we don't know what it means, and I'm going to quote, I got this from the Tax Justice Network website. It means ideas, policies, or advocacy which seek to attain fair taxation, which seek to provide social services, and this is usually done through fair taxation. And fair taxation, we mean progressive taxation, simply meaning that the people who earn a lot should pay more in taxes, and the people who earn less should pay less in taxes. It shouldn't be the other way around. So how do we achieve tax justice? Tax justice is achieved through ensuring that, first of all, everyone pays their fair share of taxes. And this can mean tackling uh, illicit financial flows, tax evasion, tax avoidance, transfer pricing, and all that stuff. But also, it can be achieved by ensuring that we have robust laws and policies in place which are able to cover some of these gaps, which can be exploited by uh, some people to evade and avoid taxes. So having the laws and the policies in place is also very important, but also having the laws alone is not enough. We must have a political leadership which is willing to implement these laws to the dot. So the issue of attaining tax justice is not about an advocacy or leading laws and leading policies and all that stuff, or having laws in place. It's also about ensuring that these laws, these policies, and for this matter, the UN Tax Convention is implemented to the dot to help us as young people. And for as a young person, for me, what matters to me is seeing that the UN Tax Convention, okay, it has come. I'm pretty sure we shall achieve it. But usually, my worry is, will it be really implemented? Shall we benefit from the convention? You know, would it be like many of the laws and the conventions and the policies that we have, uh, another paper tiger of sorts? So for me, I feel that that is what really matters to the young people, that there should be a change in their livelihoods, because as you pointed out, our challenges ranging from unemployment, ranging from the talking about the climate crisis and the climate change and all that stuff, all this requires resources to sort them out, to deal with these problems. But having the UN Tax Convention per se will not sort these problems. We have to ensure that we make it work for the young people. So another thing I could speak about in terms of when we achieve the UN Tax Convention, of course, we shall be able to provide enough essential services for young people, talking about medication, talking about health, talking about education. These are essential services which young people can get and, you know, benefit if we are able to have a say, have a fair taxation of everyone at the global level. That means we shall all be able to benefit from this taxation. But as I said, the issue of accountability and transparency is very important. And I can just refer this to our budget cycles. I think we all have budget readings in our countries, and we follow that. I mean, right from the allocation, I mean, from the revenue mobilization of these resources, the revenues have to be there, and then they have to be allocated to the sectors which are of the benefit of essential benefit to the young people.
Yes.
And then these resources have to be utilized for that purpose of which they were allocated. So for me, the UN Tax Convention can only make meaning if this process is followed to the end.
Okay.
That is only, yes.
Thank you, John. But I just want to briefly, maybe in a minute, because you speak to the problems, of course, of unemployment, poverty, and all that the youths are experiencing. But you're also worried about the implementation, that we can put all those in blueprints, but are they going to be implemented to transform the livelihoods, like you're saying? Do you think there is a role, that maybe a call that you could make to the youth in Africa? What role could the youth then play in terms of ensuring that there is that political will?
The first role could be that as young people, we have to take up the political positions. We have to be in those political spaces. You know, we have to get there and influence from there. We cannot just sit back and make the noise and all that stuff, but ensure that we get there and influence. And also, getting there per se is not enough, because we've seen so many young people attaining leadership positions, getting into positions of power, but somewhere, somehow, you know, sometimes they are really vibrant when they are on the outside, but when they get in there, I don't know what happens. But so we also have that problem, and also the problem of being informed and being well researched and well read. I think that is very, very important, because you see, if you're going to influence policy, if you're going to go and talk to people and convince them to a certain position, you have
Yeah.
to be very much aware of what you're talking about. So as young people, we really have to enhance our capacities. We have to read, we have to research, we have to be informed on some of these things. You know, the people we are dealing with usually are people, they always hire the best. You
Yeah.
know, when you talk about the multinationals, they always hire the best
Mhm.
tax lawyers, tax accountants, auditors, you know.
Yeah.
So there is no way you're going to match them if you are, you know, if you're
Yeah.
you're there. You have to really also be up to the point, to match them. So these things are very important. But also another thing I want to talk about is our capacities, especially in terms of revenue authorities, in terms of, for example, if the convention is there, do we have the capacity? For example, do we have the digital capacity to be able to tax, especially these multinational corporations? Do we have that capacity? For me, I'm not really worried about the convention. I'm sure the convention one day it will be achieved, but these are the small things which I feel that I don't know whether we shall be able to achieve them.
Yeah, I would like to believe that as Youth for Tax Justice Africa, you're also seized with ensuring that you strengthen or build that capacity amongst the youth. And
Yes.
you are seized as well with participating and influencing towards the UN Tax Convention, but also at our country level and at the Pan African level, building that movement that will be able to do the work. I'll come back to you at some point. But I would like to move to you, Bishop Nelson Kisare from Tanzania. You can also briefly just introduce yourself if I didn't pronounce that well or capture that quite well. But within the alternative mining indaba, we have always had theological reflections to all these issues: tax justice, debt justice, communities and humanity. And we're here in this session talking about the UN Tax Convention. And we would like to hear from you your reflections about why tax is such an issue for faith actors within the alternative mining Indaba family, but also outside in the work that you are doing, Bishop.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Bishop Nelson Kisari. I'm the chair of the Bishops' Council of Tanzania, the Mennonite Church, but also I'm the chairperson of the Interfaith Standing Committee on Economic Justice and Integrity of Creation for our country. Coming back to your question about the tax for faith leaders, why is it important? And I remember one of the things which God was very clear, was about tax. There are three parties in the tax regime when we're talking about paying tax, collecting tax, and utilization of that tax. And God was very clear on the three issues: how to collect the tax, how to pay tax first, collect the tax, and utilization of that tax. And paying tax is one of the prerequisites for social economic development. So everybody must pay tax, irrespective whether you are blue, you are red, you are white, you are yellow, you have to pay tax. Whether you are tall, you are short, you have to pay tax. Whether you are a bishop, you are a president, you have to pay tax. So tax is for all. And what does God say about collecting tax? God is saying, don't collect more. That is for tax collectors. What God tells them, don't collect more than is legal. They are not supposed to collect more than what is legal. That is for tax collectors. We have seen sometimes they collect more than what is required, what is legal. They sometimes go even beyond what has been prescribed in the law. So that is what God is telling them. What God is telling the community, the people to do in terms of tax. Then that one I will read in the scripture, Romans 13, verses 6 to 7. And it says, that is also why you pay taxes, because the authorities are working for God when they fulfill their duties. Pay then what you owe them. Pay your personal and property taxes and show respect and honor for them all. So we are supposed to pay tax. And this is what God is telling us. Pay tax for personal taxes and for property tax. So we have to pay. This is for us all. This is for the people, for the community. What God is telling the authority to do with that tax. And I will also read that from Isaiah 32, verse 13 to 17 to 18. The fruit of the righteousness will be peace. Its effect will be quietness and confidence forever. My people will live in dwelling places, in secure homes, in undisturbed places of rest. What God is telling authority, the government, righteousness. If they do it the other way around, it means there will not be peace. People will not have confidence with that government. And it's supposed to be the government which is working for God. What does it mean? It means if it is a government which is not working for God, which is not collecting taxes on behalf of the people, and then that tax which has been collected on behalf of the people, utilization of that tax goes back to them because they are collecting tax on the behalf of the people. And utilization of that tax is not for them, but is for the people. If they don't do that, because we have seen sometimes in most of the governments in Africa, I think it's even beyond the boundaries of Africa, the taxes are not for the people, but part of it is going to the personal pockets. And sometimes misappropriation, sometimes illicit capital transfer from outside the country, which is coming from the tax which has been collected. Instead of using that taxes for the people, it goes somewhere else.
Yes.
So for faith leaders, it is our duty. We have a role to, to tell the people they have the obligation to pay tax. We have an obligation to tell tax collectors, don't collect more than what is legal. We have the obligation to tell the authority, please utilize the taxes you have collected on our behalf for the development of the people and not for your family and your friends. And yeah, so that
Yes.
is why it is important for us to do
Yes,
that.
and you were already touching on the role of the faith actors in that they can play in the fight for tax justice. Um, and it is the call, as you're saying, that pay the taxes and those that receive the taxes then provide the services. Is there anything else in terms of what you could do in joining the faith-based organizations? It's across religions. It touches on everyone when it comes to tax justice. And I like the idea of the scripture that you have read that pay your taxes so that those that are in authority can fulfill their duties.
Mm.
So if that is not happening, then that's not tax justice.
Yeah, and you remember, I don't know if you have the data, the amount of tax which is collected in Africa, south of Sahara, the potential tax which is supposed to be collected is even less than 35%. The potential tax which is supposed to be collected. The reason why? The tax base. If the tax base is small, that means the amount of tax which can be collected will also be a small amount. And especially if you look at the formal sector and informal sector, it, it is very easy to collect tax from formal sector, but in formal sector, I think most of the countries are facing challenges on how to collect the taxes from informal sector. So there is huge amount of potential taxes which is not even collected. Even the amount of tax which is collected from giant corporate businesses, sometimes they evade tax, paying tax, and we ended up getting very little tax for the social development. So we have a role as faith leaders to do the advocacy and engage the government, talking to them, discussing with them on how best we can, first of all, maximize collection of taxes, which is to be supposed to be applied for the development of the people, we also have a role to play to demand from the government side in terms of what my brother is already talking about the accountability and transparency. And why transparency? The transparency because there are certain amount of money which is not applied for the development of the people. The bribery which is taking place, corruption in the country which is taking place, the money which we have seen most of the African countries, they borrow money, the national debt of the country is going up, and we collect taxes and we repay back on that debt instead of directing the tax which has been collected for the development of the people. We collect taxes and we repay the debt which has been borrowed. And we have seen that going up. If you look at the ratio between the national debt of the country against the GDP of the country, the debt is going up. And at the end of the day, you collect the taxes. Instead of directing the taxes for the infrastructure, the clean water, the health sector, education, the same amount of taxes utilized for paying debt.
Yeah.
And if you look at that debt, does that debt come in for the development of the people? Sometimes not. So those are the challenges which we are facing and why it is important for the faith leaders to be talking about them and challenging the government which is in power
Yeah. Yeah.
to rectify.
Uh, Thank you very much, Bishop, I think, for that political economy analysis of the debt, tax, and the economic justice within the faith-based sector and what can be done at that level. And I think there is a lot of work that actually could be done and have us all join our forces as we fight for humanity. We have heard a lot about tax justice from the youth perspective, from the faith based, from the African perspective. And what I am hearing is that we have to make it happen. And I would like to take you there in for us to talk now about the UN Tax Convention in terms of exactly what it means. How can it then contribute to tax justice? I think we have heard about transparency, about accountability. So, this is the representative role of taxation, the redistributive role of taxation that we are hearing here. How can the tax convention, the UN tax convention, deliver or contribute to that? So, I have two questions for you. And then the second question for you from me is what is it that we need to do to influence the UN for the implementation of the UN Tax Convention? But it could go beyond that. I think John's very convinced that it will come at some point. But what is it that we're going to do at country level? So let's talk about that. How do we make it happen at the influencing level? And how is it going to change? How can it change? What's the potential, the vast potential?
Thank you. I'm also convinced that it will come. And I think I think a UN tax convention will be very important because tax has both local, national, and international dimensions. And we need to solve the local tax problems on a local level, the national tax problems on a national level, and the international tax problems on an international level. And we do have OECD, the most important organization developing tax rules today, but that is not an organization where every country can participate on an equal footing. And the fact that multinationals and some very rich individuals use secrecy, loopholes, various techniques to avoid paying taxes, that is not a problem that can be solved only on an international level. International problems need international solutions. And we do have so many good examples of international conventions and organizations being established in order to solve international problems. United Nations, for example, started as a convention, became a very important organization. The World Health Organization, the Climate Change Convention, and the Paris Agreement. Lots of conventions on weapons and environment, and very many other examples. And what's a similarity on all the conventions and international organizations we have today is that nobody knew exactly what they would look like and what kind of effect it would have, how it would change societies and people's lives before they were negotiated, adopted, and implemented. And that is also the case for a UN tax convention. We don't know exactly the content of it, the principles of it, because it have to be negotiated in between states. But we as civil society, we can influence the states. And we have lots of ambitions for it. And Norwegian Church Aid and I know many other civil society organizations as well want a UN tax convention to make it possible for every country to secure revenue from value created in that country. Taxes should be paid where the value is created, where the workers are, and where the resources are being extracted. And yeah, I think we have a lot of ideas of the content of a tax convention. Like Eurodad has written a draft convention with lots of examples of what a convention can of the content of it, like transparency measures, like automatic exchange of information, country by country reporting. We do have the ideas. What we need is international cooperation to implement them. We need the ideas to turn into international law. And your question about how to influence the UN, to influence the UN is all about, and yeah, how to make it happen. It is all about influencing and cooperating with the states. And we, of course, need to be present at the strategic arena like the United Nations General Assembly. But it's also very important to influence between these meetings. And I also very much believe in the diversity of campaigning. We do need to make reports, research, have the lobby meetings, but we also need to have side events like this and have public meetings, use social media, use the media, build the momentum. And we need both the very dedicated activists traveling to the UN and having the lobby meetings, cooperating with the states who really want to push forward for a convention, and also lobby the states who are more skeptical. But we also need a broader group of people campaigning from their home, from their city, from where they are, like watching UN web TV, like I did this fall, watching the resolution being adopted, and the great statements from Nigeria and South Africa, for example. A really fantastic job made by Nigeria and the African group. Yeah, I think we need to work together, and we need different organizations. And the most efficiently way to influence a process, like a process for a convention, is to cooperate and to coordinate. in our coalition or some way of coordination is very effectful.
True. Thank you very much. And I think you bring really great insights into this in terms of the levels of cooperation at different levels, from our country levels to the to the African level to the global level itself. And I think the COVID-19 taught us a lot in terms of international global problems and how they require as well global cooperation and global solutions in dealing with them. And I think they exposed a lot in terms of the fiscal space that we have to respond to the different emergencies and challenges that we're now facing. And I think the issue around the scope for us to influence is also within us, to say how do we mobilize and how do we work together to ensure that we do influence and cooperate at the states level, which I think is something we still have to learn at the civil society level in Africa. How do we cooperate with our states, the member states, as we go towards the UN Text Convention, whenever it's going to come. But I think thank you very much for those insights. I'm sure we'll come back to you once again. I would like to move to you, Honorable Henry. You are representing Parliament, and as civil society organizations, we have worked in communities. We've worked with our parliaments in different countries, and it's good to have a network of parliamentarians that passionate, that are really committed in terms of combating illicit financial flows in Africa. And I think the UN Tax Convention idea, or resolution as it is now, should be of interest to members of parliament in Africa. And I would like to hear more from you in terms of why would MPs want a UN tax convention, and how would it benefit our African states? I'll come in with more questions if you have, but we can start with those two. Why is it important? How can we work with civil society, with communities you represent, you legislate, you do the oversight? How does this all come together?
Thank you for the invitation to the African Parliamentary Network on Illicit Flows and Finances. The driving force behind this organization is Dr. Sabalala, and I am standing in for her. We last had a meeting in Zambia where members of parliament from 40 countries were represented, and we launched a toolkit on illicit financial flows, which is very helpful. And just glancing through this, I also call it a toolkit. I think we'd like to thank the Norwegian Church Aid for launching this document, because it now empowers us with knowledge about this very important challenge. It's very important. You heard earlier on the keynote speaker said that our former president, Thabo Mbeki, made the point, that these matters, these tax matters, must be dealt with at a larger forum and not the G20 or the OECD, because the African voice is hardly heard in those forums. At a United Nations level, the voice will be heard. It cannot be that conglomerates don't pay any tax in most of the African countries, and it is the most indigent that have to pay the tax. In South Africa, the poorest of the poor pay 50% VAT, which is a tax on basic food items. And the conglomerates, through the illicit financial flows, you find that the toolkit, and you must get a hold of a copy of the toolkit. Maybe you can download it. The cool toolkit has proven that on the average, 50% of the GDP of all African countries is lost to that country through illicit financial flows. So it is very important that we support a United Nations convention. There seems to be consensus that such a convention can be held. So the seed has been sown, and it is now up to members of parliament from the different countries in Africa to raise their voices. And later on, when I'm asked the question, I will ask you how I will raise my voice in the next few days about this particular matter to the nation.
Mhm.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes, yes. I I know that you have a network and parliaments are at national levels, but what are the entry points? I think this is what we would want to hear about. What can African MPs ask for or work for at the national levels to support the UN Tax Convention? I know they originally their suggestions that there's need to hype up the state of preparedness by governments in designing the frameworks for the implementation of the tax reforms, probably turnaround times for aligning the reforms to existing laws and the like. Is this some are the conversations going on in that direction, or this is work that we still need to do?
Look, African members of parliament must raise their voices. And in South Africa, tomorrow we will have the State of the Nation address, one of the most important events in Africa with all the pomp and splendor, bands and horses, you name it. I don't even think the new King of England can match the pomp and splendor that we're going to have tomorrow. But then we as members of parliament have a right to respond to the State of the Nation address. And my response, and I only get 5 minutes.
Mhm.
The president gets about an hour if the EFF will allow him to speak, because they want to disrupt the proceedings. But let's assume that in the end that they are thrown out of parliament and he can give his speech. We then will have a chance to respond to the speech in the next few days. And then he has to respond and his relevant minister has to respond. So I will make a call that South Africa supports a United Nations convention that we are discussing today uh, with regard to tax justice. And just today, I was in a portfolio committee on justice. I serve on that committee, and the head of our prosecuting authority, she indicated how money is illegally flowing out of the country, and we are losing a lot of tax. So she talked about state agents and they had a long list of the culprits, but they didn't mention the mining companies. The mining companies are responsible for at least 70% of tax that can be used to promote socio-economic conditions of the poorest of the poor in South Africa. So there is definitely a need for us to recover. You know, there cannot be uhuru, there cannot be independence if this happens. Illicit financial flows, the conglomerates not paying any tax or minimizing their tax. Uh, 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 that uhuru is a fake uhuru. I want any person from any African country to tell me that they have real uhuru. We don't even have uhuru here in South Africa because of the economic exploitation. So yes, we as members of parliament, we can raise our voices and we can instruct our ambassador to the United Nations and serving on a different forums to support the agenda for a convention. And We just want to wake them up. Maybe they haven't reported back because I haven't heard about it in my portfolio committees. I also serve on the International Relations Portfolio Committee. And this is the first time, and that's why I want to thank the Norwegian Christian Aid for bringing it to our attention. You've just given me, some content for 2 minutes of my speech in reply to the State of the Nation. Thank you very much.
Wow. So there really is a lot. Thank you very much, Honorable Hendricks. I think this really means that we have a lot of work to do as well when it comes to our parliamentarians and within our different countries, but also at the Pan African level in terms of raising awareness and what is it that that we're going to do moving forward. Thank you very much. I still have more questions. I'll come back at some point. But right now, I'd like to turn to you, Gilbert. Gilbert Makore is the Regional Director, Anglophone and Lusophone Africa, EITI. Gilbert, welcome. I'm sure you have had the aspirations from the different sectors, civil society, from the parliamentarians around the UN Tax Convention. The citizens' aspirations, I'm sure, are very clear. People would want to see their resources work for them. They want true Uhuru. True Uhuru comes with access to opportunities. It comes with distancing and living standards. It comes with dignity and all that, and control of resources, which is not currently happening. So I would like to hear from you your perspectives in terms of what could be the potential obstacles and challenges on the way towards the UN Tax Convention, and how as well it can be made attractive. The UN Tax Convention can be made attractive for companies or the private sector, if there's ever anything like that as well. Um, I think what we're talking about is tax evasion, we're talking about tax dodging, we're talking about IFFs, and we know the major players within that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janet. And I think the only place that is a true Uhuru is Kenya. I think that's only President Uhuru Kenyatta. But anyway, that's just an aside. Yeah, your questions are quite difficult, to be quite honest. Yeah, because I think at some point, a lot of people actually felt like I was one of those that, multilateralism died a very long time ago. I mean, of course, the support that has gone on to Ukraine in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war has kind of, in some sense, given some hope. The reason why I say that is because the reason why I'm saying that multilateralism can be perceived to have died is what happened with COVID, and you talked about it. This was an issue of life and death, but we also what happens with with most of the countries who had the means, essentially, in some cases, hoarding vaccines to the point that they expired while the risk of death for many African nations, and not just in Africa, but in other developing parts of the world, were desperate for those vaccines. So that, in some sense, worries me. And I think I would want to thank the NCA for this brilliant publication. I've read through it. It's a fantastic piece of work because it also highlights some of the challenges as well with climate change, where we do have the UNFCCC. That, and I guess it goes to your point that yes, I think that is definitely needed. The convention is definitely needed, but we have to be alive to what problems it will actually address based on how we've seen other conventions actually work. The tax rules, the global tax rules that are there now, did not, come out of thin air. So the problem is a technical problem, but I actually think it's more a political problem as well. So the road towards the UN Tax Convention, in my view, is not so much, I guess, yeah, the technical elements are there, but it's also a political problem. And by political problem, it's a power issue. So yes, there is consensus, I guess broad consensus that this is a good thing, but there are significant powers that would, contest it, and that's why the OECD process has not worked as intended. So I guess my sense is that I totally agree with you that the local capacity to tax and the local capacity to administer tax is as important as the conversations around, the Global Tax Convention, and the report makes that quite clear. So I think waiting for the quote unquote waiting for the convention while not, applying, doubling, if not tripling, if not quadrupling our efforts in strengthening local tax capacity, will not be very good for us. And part of the reason is that the challenge is the assets that we're talking about are wasting assets. I was looking at you, Reverend, and I was recalling I think the NCA colleagues were there as well in Norway when we were having a conference on Angola last year, end of last year. And the production profiles for Angola, for Nigeria, two of the biggest oil producers, are declining. They are producing less oil today than they were, 5 years ago. And without significant exploration, it appears that, the assets we're talking about, essentially oil, gas, and mineral resources are not forever. So with respect to tax, then what that means is that the challenge is multiplied by a higher factor. Yeah, it's unlike, service or, digital transactions or things like that, which will be there almost in perpetuity, So I think that's where a problem arises with respect to African countries, at least with respect to the road towards this convention. I think on making this attractive, so I don't work for the private sector, but I do work for a multi-stakeholder initiative that involves industry, companies, that involves government and civil society. And there, yeah, I think, like I said, the challenge is that the people that need to reform have possibly the least incentive to reform. Companies, go into these areas to make as much profit as possible. The profits that we've been hearing, I think I can't remember what BP was. BP's results came out yesterday. I can't remember, but in the billions of US dollars. Likewise, Shell and so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a challenge, and even then, not all of them are even talking of a moral responsibility to channel those profits, what you call it, super profit tax. There's no interest, at least from quite a number of the companies. And that then presents, a challenge to say if those actors may not be as forthcoming, even in a super cycle, what more, during ordinary times. So that I think I'm just saying this to, it's the reality of what African countries have to deal with. But what is encouraging though is that aspect of companies having a moral responsibility, and countries as well. I mean, some of the Western countries have a moral responsibility as well. Part of it based on history, but part of it also based on their international standing. I mean, so there are countries, this should not be an African issue. Like only the African countries are supporting a convention. The UK has a moral responsibility to support a global, a tax, UN tax convention. Countries like Norway have that moral responsibility as well because of what the values that they stand for globally. So they should be seen to be supporting this and to be seen to be supporting this quite strongly as well, I feel. So I think what is important is, as you're rightly saying, is to kind of build a broad-based coalition of these actors that have that see the sense in this, and I think that will be very important to do. Likewise, on industry, they are not all industry actors are the same. That's just the truth. All industry actors are different.
Yeah.
So where industry actors at least stand up and say we are concerned about ESG, it's not just about mine site. It's not just about your onshore, offshore operations and the communities around that area, or whatever it is. It's also about your group. So I think there are challenges, but there is hope, because there are areas where where civil society and other actors can find hooks, and also not to minimize the work that has been done. I mean, ATAF has done a lot in a very short space of time in terms of also building that consensus across Africa. They've done a lot of work to do that. And if you've ever engaged with that particular constituency, the tax administrators, in some sense, maybe in some context, they may not wield a lot of power because they are administrators. The policies, they don't necessarily set the policy, but they are very professional. They are very committed to these issues. I've been in the rooms when these issues are discussed. They are very committed, and ATAF has done a lot of work. And of course, civil society, not to minimize as well. So I'm not necessarily bringing doom and gloom, but also just a reality that, look, even with a UN convention, this will be tough. Actually, getting there will be tough, but even then, yeah, it's not a panacea. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gilbert, for those insights. I think rich insights from our panel. Would we would like to now get into a discussion and open a conversation for the people that are in the room. But we also have an online audience, and we would like you to post if you have any questions. We will also take them. We had already crowdsourced on some questions already had come for the panel. And because Gilbert, you're holding the mic, and it's a follow-up question. You spoke about, we are talking a lot about the South-South cooperation and how as Africa we can go, we can continue to do our advocacy work for the implementation of the UN Text Convention. But what would you, but you are now saying there is also the North-South that should be happening. It shouldn't only be South Africa, Zimbabwe, or Tanzania talking about the UN Text Convention, but the UK, Norway, they also have a moral obligation at some level if it's moral. But what are the fears? What would be the fears at the global level from the corporates, from the other states in the north in terms of implementing, the global tax reforms that we're calling for? What are the fears? What's at stake?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think the fears are largely related to, because if you lose, or at least lose some taxing rights, that is an implication on the revenue that you'd earn. And I guess the challenge with the extractive sector is that, if it was any other sector, maybe, I'm not really a tax expert, but the challenge with the extractive sector is that the problem is really global. That's where the problem is. So you can't really just do your own, thing, and we do our own thing and then proceed with that. But yeah, I think the fears are a loss of taxing rights and therefore revenues. I don't want to keep giving the example of Norway, because I'm hosted by the Norwegian government. I currently
Yes.
stay there, but yeah, I mean, there's some things that I still don't understand. Like, for example, in Norway, the effective tax rate for oil and gas companies I think it's like 70 something, 78%, 78, I think something like that. I don't think, I don't know why, for example, that would be, I've not heard of an African country going that high. I don't think that's the case. If you look at the revenue that was earned in the last year, I think it was close to 100 billion US dollars. 100 billion US dollars, and the projections are that this will be increasing, and likewise for all the other countries where oil and gas operations are quite active. So I think it's the fear, maybe a loss of control, number one, on directing the conversation, but also just to say that it's not. I find they're not monolithic as well. Like there are countries that support these efforts from the global north. So I think there's scope for that north to south collaboration. Just one point to say that again, the OECD does not just stand by itself. Countries put money into the OECD to lead some of these discussions. Where you've got Pan-African institutions, they should also be equally supported to be part of the broader conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gilbert. John, I want to come to you with a question that was crowdsourced here. You have spoken about the UN Tax Convention is going to come, but there was a question we said, and from the panel as well, I think it links with this question that the UN Tax Convention is beyond talking about the money that has to come back. There is the politics to it. It's value based. There are principles. There must be a framework to it. So, from your perspective, from the youth perspective, and from the African perspective, how do you think the UN Tax Convention should look like? What are the key elements that should be there to make it effective?
Okay, thank you very much. I think just to go straight to the answer, I think for us as young people, we feel that the UN Tax Convention, if it comes through, and I'm sure it will, it's going to present an opportunity for us to to have a say in some of the in how taxation at global level it should work out. And of course, coming from the background that young people, especially on the African continent, we are the majority. It simply implies that we are the ones going to be either most affected, or we are the ones going to benefit the most in case it comes out in our favor. So I think first of all, it gives us an opportunity. It gives us a platform to have an input, to have something that we would love, to reflect. And about the things that I would love to see there as a young person. For me, I'm very much interested, especially in the young people operating, young traders, young people doing business. As we are all aware, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area came into play now, and already some African states are already trading, though of course at a small scale, but it is promising. And in the words of the Secretary General of the Continental Free Trade Area, he said that this is an opportunity for young people. It's going to create a number of jobs. But I mean, as we all know, some of the anchors of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is the elimination of tariff barriers, and those can be simply described as the taxes. So I don't know. I would love to see how the UN Tax Convention is going to weigh up these two, because on one hand you have the Continental Free Trade Area, and then there is a tax convention. But then on the other hand, you have young people who are trying to trade, doing cross-border trade. I would love to see very much that aspect of cross-border trade. How is it going to operate? I want to really see that. I want to see that catered for, and especially for young people operating in small medium enterprises, especially because most of us don't have the financial power to compete, with most of the multinationals and all that stuff. And maybe I think My sister there talked about having local tax problems, being solved at a local level. But I think that when you have this globalization, when you have this cross-border trade, it becomes difficult to say that you're going to solve uh, tax issues, local tax issues at a local level, because I think that it becomes a regional thing, it becomes a continental thing, it becomes a global thing. So I feel that those aspects, and I think right now there's this feeling amongst young people that we have been left out, especially when it comes to issues to do with cross-border trade and the tax implications. So for me, I feel that that is something that should really come out very, very clearly, not of course stepping on our opportunities, which we are going to benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for that. I think it's really important to open up spaces for discussion and conversations in terms of how the UN Tax Convention is going to deal with the issues and the problems that we're facing as a continent. I would like to take a few hands from the room. I see quite a number of them. I'm going to start from bit of a leftist level. So I will start from the left and I'm coming there. So I take 5 hands, then direct your question to any of the panelists or to all of them. So I'll start with right at the back. There's a hand at the back. Second hand, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand. Please, let's quickly do that. Then I'll take another round. So when I start, I'm going to start from there. That's that. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'll come. No.
Okay. So my question goes to Gilbert. Probably we just have to take another dive, Gilbert, into the global tax architecture. And I think this is a very interesting development now that we're talking about the UN Tax Convention and the provisions that have been shared. But I mean, I see some paradox here to say, as much as we intend to promote the retention of source country taxing rights, we've got so many players within the global tax architecture. And you'd see that sometimes it's the source countries that are actually promoting regressive tax regimes, by giving these tax holidays, tax incentives, and sometimes, offering these companies in the globe from the global south, an opportunity to defer their tax. So we're trying to promote equality, within that framework. But the guys that we're trying to protect, probably the guys that are in the global south here, they're also shooting themselves in the foot. So how do we reconcile that? So my question is, so what incentive is there rather for if this sails through, probably? What incentives now there exists for companies to invest here in the global south? Where we have actually probably resolved the issue of these unfair tax incentives and tax holidays that exist now. Are we not going to lead to these guys de-investing? To say we can no longer go there because we're impinging on their, on what would call an opportunity that is existing now. So maybe you can just touch on that, Gilbert. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, let's make our questions very short and precise. So we take another set of hands. There's a hand right behind you. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Ambassador Bridget Mutsipe. I have been in the mining industry since 1986. And I'm actually quite happy that I walked in this session because I thought it was women in mining because I came from one session. And then I walk in to a tax conversation. I'm actually the person that went to the Department of Mineral and Energy. And when Joan Fabs was the portfolio committee chair of the Trade and Industry Department, and I then said to the government of South Africa that we cannot continue in Parliament, continue doing this. As a mining producer, I then discovered that many mining companies were not paying tax, especially companies that have a prime listing offshore. And in that interaction, Joan Fabs, our portfolio committee, because something has been said, what can governments do Our government in South Africa then, through the Honorable Joan Fabs, who was then the Portfolio Committee Chair of Trade and Industry, she then, with the Portfolio Committee Chair of all the political parties in South Africa, looked into this. And they had a joint session in Parliament with the Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Finance, and Department of Mines. And all the committee members looked into it. And luckily, Judge Dennis Davis was then being employed by our minister, Praveen Gordhan, was then the Minister of Finance at that time, to do an investigation in the illicit capital, because I exposed to the South African government how illicit capital takes place in the mining industry, how we in our lifetime should not allow it to happen. I went even further to expose to the South African government the research that was done by Alternative Information Development Center, the Global Financial Integrity, and also the fact at that time, luckily, George Rio Tinto and BHP Billiton were being charged, sued by the Australian Tax Office for the very illicit capital, the thing that's happening there. And then out of that, our President Becky, former President Becky, is now chairing the illicit capital committee for the African Union. Now, my aim as the Goodwill Ambassador for the African Union Parliament, I'm not an ambassador, I'm the first producer of minerals in South Africa. My brother Patrice started 6 years after me. We started in 1986, and we're building mines all over the world. So what we did with this is that I then went to the African Union Parliament because they asked me to be the ambassador for inter-Africa trade and also for economic development and entrepreneurship. And then I said to the Parliament of Africa that I will organize a day, a Mining Daba Day, similar to the one that we have on a Sunday, where the corporate executives come with the ministers from Africa at Gallagher Estate, and then we pursue these discussions beyond what can government do on illicit capital, on issues that has to do with beneficiation, and all these issues that are so fundamentally, uniquely has to be embraced to make sure that the boom that's coming into Africa in terms of mineralization and the benefits that will come from the mining industry can be properly enhanced, properly defined, properly integrated in the governments, with the governments and organizations. So I'll then invite you, and hopefully I'll see you later and talk to you, because I'm now running from one session to another. And I'm happy I came here at the right time.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. There's a hand, the next hand is right here.
Thank you. My name is Reverend Baxton Mauridi from Malawi, and I'm representing the All Africa Conference of Churches. Hearing from the panelists present here, I had few be it observations or additionals on how the church, being from the faith community, how the church or role of the
Go
church.
very short, Reverend.
Yes, please.
Your addition, so that it's not another presentation from
Exactly.
the Faith West.
Yeah.
And questions, especially if you have.
Yeah, we feel. I feel like the government should consider minimizing following, because that's one way we can help the communities to gain what they're supposed to gain. So if borrowing is being minimized, that would be relevant for our communities. Not only that, government to consider if they're borrowing concessional loans other than non-concessional loans, because these are the things that are also exploiting indigenous Africans.
Yeah.
Not only that, lastly, I feel like government should also consider an objectivity in as far as the budget consultation is concerned, because some of these things are also emanating from being not honest when we are trying to engage the stakeholders. So that also is a problem on its own. So I feel these are additionals I wanted to put.
Thank you. Very valid points there. I have the two hands, the gentleman there and comrade at the back there. Then from what I'm hearing, there's one question for Gilbert. The other ones were really comments to strengthen our discussion. You can, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much. My name is Idris Linger. I'm working as researcher for Tax Justice Network. Not really a question, and don't be surprised that you have not so many questions, because the topic is a bit tough. And What I would like to say is just thank you to the Norwegian Church Aid, because you are helping addressing real difficult issues. And now we're just talking about moving the the global taxation problems discussion out of the OECD to a more democratic global institution, which is the UN. But doing that perfectly will not solve all the problem around the global taxation, like price and transfer, or the fact that we don't have country by country reportings, or and all those stuff. And also, what I would like, I don't know, because uh, unfortunately, we civil society organizations in Africa, we only discuss about these kind of topics in this such of events. But now we have to push forward. If I ask the whole attendance who has already read that UN tax proposal, I'm sure no one have done it. Unfortunately, what are we discussing about then? Do you imagine that? The other peoples over there, even if they don't read the tax convention, they pay people who are doing that for them, providing them good advices. So I think my comments will be towards ourselves. You guys from the Norwegian Church 8 are doing a great job raising attention to this. I think on our own side, we should keep the pace. Try to read the convention and understand it. I've been lucky to heard about the convention because I discussed with Tove Maria, who wrote the drafting of that. And I also discussed with about that with Alex Copram, who's been part of it. But not all of us is aware of that. Even our respective friends from the PALU, I'm sure they've never seen that convention. But someday they will have to ratify it for their countries, respective countries. So I think the first thing is to work about our own awareness of the opportunity that UN Tax Convention provides, but also awareness of the weakness that exists according to our
Thank you, sir.
specific
We
problems.
need
So
to
that's it.
really close this.
So we can discuss about it
Yes,
for 10
let's
months.
discuss. Yes,
We
please,
won't
can
have
we
to.
have your very short comment? Please, may we make our comments so short? There were so many hands that we still need.
I would like to talk in Portuguese. May I? Do we have time to?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm Gracia. Estou a representar. I'm representing Mosaico Institute for Citizenship. E a minha questão vai para o representante do Parlamento africano. Com o apoio da NCA, nós temos intervenção no Mochico para comunidades afetadas pela indústria extrativa. E nós temos estado a trabalhar com as comunidades no sentido de dar ferramentas para que as comunidades chamem a responsabilidade dos decisores, dos stakeholders envolvidos na indústria extrativa. Entretanto, nós temos dificuldades quando temos que fazer a advocacia que saem dos resultados das pesquisas que fazemos nos lugares afetados pela indústria extrativa, por vários aspectos, em particular, a constituição do nosso parlamento, que é desequilibrada, onde nós temos um partido que por si só domina. Então, para influenciar processos de tomada de decisões como o Orçamento Geral do Estado, nós somos chamados apenas no momento em que as discussões já estão avançadas, a proposta já está apresentada no parlamento. Como influenciar políticas públicas justas para essas comunidades, que os seus recursos financiam o Orçamento Geral do Estado, mas infelizmente as políticas públicas não respondem às suas necessidades. Então, como podemos transpor as barreiras que são impostas pela política partidária que dominam os nossos parlamentos? Obrigada.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are the 5 questions or comments. There is a question for you, Gilbert. I hope you have the mic already. It's sitting somewhere, the mic. Is it the same one we're using? May we quickly bring it to our panelists? Then there is the question around the citizens, and I also had it crowdsourced, and I was going to give it to you, Bishop. How do we engage? What should be done by the citizens, governments, and companies as we work through the UN Tax Convention? And I think it also relates even to what Gilbert has been asked from the Global South. Are we not shooting off? You can start there. You can start, Reverend. Yes. So the question is around citizens. How do we engage with citizens? How do we ensure that we have the citizens come in to work with the government, the companies, as we prepare for the road to the UN Tax Convention? And I was saying that you can also link it to her question.
Yes, thank you. Engagement is very important. Collaboration is very important. And I can give you a testimony of that kind of collaboration and engagement which we have done through the Interfaith Standing Committee in our country. We have been engaging the government, especially to determine how do they prioritize when they do the budgeting for the year. How do they prioritize the tax which they have collected? Is that tax going to be prioritized and go to the sectors which have got a significant impact to the community? Because if the big chunk of the tax which has been collected is not going to be utilized in the sector which has got a huge impact to the community, it means that the majority of the people will continue to remain poor, because the tax collection is supposed to address the status of the poorness of the people, to reduce the inequality in the community. And we have done that effectively, and we have seen that kind of engagement with the government. And I can give you a testimony in our country, it is working, because we have seen the government is now channeling the tax which has been collected to the two major sectors, the educational sector, the health sector, and to the agriculture. And they have done so because of the consultation, the engagement, the collaboration which has been done between the government and the Interfaith Standing Committee. So it is possible that it can be done.
Yeah.
And we have seen that. The other thing which we are doing on through the Interfaith Committee is to see how the government is working to reduce the poverty within the community. And that can only be done through engagement and collaboration and through discussion, which we have been doing. So it is possible. If you do, we continue to engage, continue to collaborate, we continue to work together.
Thank you, Reverend.
Yep.
Gilbert, from where you're sitting, the Global South.
Thank you. Yeah, the question was interesting. I think, yeah, that's a challenge. But I feel like the pressure has to be brought to bear on our own governments. That's my sense, that we have to keep up the pressure. And it goes to your point that there are some aspects that essentially cannot be dealt with by the convention if it ever actually comes through. Much of the work still remains for us to hold our governments to account on tax incentives and all that. That would possibly negate tax incentives, that would negate whatever convention you come up with. And just to say that I also feel like the days of aid essentially driving public sector spending are kind of gone, in my view. The issue of DRI, domestic resource mobilization, is now firmly accepted on the continent and elsewhere, that you actually just need to mobilize domestic resources to finance education, health, and so on and so forth. So that puts African countries in a tough position, because you now have to mobilize the resources yourself. And we are learning some very tough lessons. I think if you look at the situation in Ghana right now, on the situation with public debt, the situation in Zambia, in Mozambique, yeah, so quite a number of countries. When you look at the situation with public finances, is a bit worrying, and we're having to learn those lessons, that if we do not tax well, not just to corporates, but also citizens. I think there's conversations around, taxing the informal sector. So I think that multiplicity of factors, the pressure, but also government having to realize that aid alone cannot carry the budget, is contributing or at least can contribute to reform. Just one last point I wanted to make is on, and I think the Reverend was mentioning that it can be done. I think you cannot work in this sector if you do not have hope, or if you're not an optimist. And the report cites that things that we're now talking about now is commonplace. We're having a session on beneficial ownership. Just 7 years ago, it was almost unthinkable. Contract disclosure is an accepted norm now. So it is possible. But yeah, I think it will take quite a lot to get there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. I think we still have a lot. I want to take another round before we call on Evelyn from Tax Justice Network Africa. And I'm going to start with you, Mutuso. So I have Mutuso right there at the back. You can take the hand closer there, my brother. Then you come here, we'll come to the Reverend, and exactly, yes, there's the other. So we have you, Reverend. We have you, yes, your hand was up, and I will end there. I don't know if you saw that I picked your hand after the frustration.
Thank you very much, Janet. I think, unlike the young man there who is worried about implementation, my concern is basically to say, are we ever going to get there in terms of the adoption of the treaty itself, based on the experience that we've seen with other conventions? I think we have been grappling for a binding treaty on business and human rights for a number of years now. And there is some serious opposition, both by governments and the private sector itself. And I think this was also highlighted even in the opening remarks, to say, not easy. Yeah, of course, there have come some comfort there to say, but feasible. But we know from experience that this may take a while. And my question is, from those that are on the panel, in terms of estimation, when is this likely to happen from your experience? But as we wait for that, Gilbert and others, what can be done, and I think for me, at the moment by governments to make sure that at least there's effective taxation, as you pointed out, the importance of domestic resource mobilization. So what tools are there that can actually be used to make sure that we're able to effectively mobilize tax at the national level as we wait for the binding treaty on taxation? That is, if we get there. Thank you.
What do we do? Please give him quickly. Can we come here?
Yeah, perhaps my question is an extension to his. We are coming from the idea of the UN tax convention is quite exciting, but without context, I think a community context, I think it would be empty. The idea is what is legal and what is just is what should be distinguished. It can be legal, but as far as it's unjust, it's not obeyed to. I'm speaking this in the context of a young man, because when you are speaking, I was trying to imagine a young man in my village. What does this mean to him? My observation is this. If we do not address the issues that are on the ground now, the discussion that we're having today is equally empty. A man in my village, for example, is taxed every day. But we should also understand that sometimes a man in my village is an object, not a subject of tax evasion. Sometimes he can participate. Reason being, the tax is not being utilized okay. In my country, for example, 20% of the tax money is spent, is used, it goes in people's pockets. Why should a man pay? Is that just? Why should we continuously tax this young man? And also, we should also understand that sometimes to be just is sometimes to adopt to situations. We are facing global inflation. Why should we tax a young man on basics and we expect that person to pay? How do we expect that person when he goes in a shop, He wants to buy a phone at $300. And they tell him, without a receipt, you can give me $240. And we expect that guy at some point to say that, I am patriotic, I'll give you the $300. So these are the questions that I think we should be having as young people and as a
Okay, thank you very much. May you please quickly give our comrade right here the mic. From there's the Reverend. You give Oven, then we'll go right.
Thank you very much. I'm Father Emmanuel Chikoya from the Council of Churches in Zambia. I would like to affirm the moral aspect that was brought into the picture, and I think the advantage that religious leaders have in terms of championing such a perspective. I think the local international networks of the church could be very helpful, like they did during the HIPIC, the issue of fighting for debt cancellation. My mind was grappling with this challenge. On one hand, yes, let's work on our government. The madam had brought in the international angle. How can it be possible that the same countries that talk about good governance, that talk about, when the mining corporations are in those countries, they follow every law, the same countries would have banks that would receive that money that is lost through illicit financial flows.
Thank you.
And so there is a problem both at the national level and international level. The Europeans and others have a moral duty to do the right thing. If there was zero tolerance, there could be better tax collection. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish we had all the time. I think the conversations are really becoming heated. Yes, you can pass it. Yes, as close as you can. Then he can pass on to. You can give him. It's okay. Then he'll pass.
Yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Hassan Logat. I'm from the Benchmarks Foundation. I mean, I think that there's two levels in which we should approach this issue. One is to get the political will to get it passed, okay, from various governments. And I think that Matusa's point about others not working, we will start dividing some of our team that we may have. Like the binding treaty on TNCs, for example, Norway is on the other side of this debate, right? So what I think we need to do is to see who's with us here and get it passed. But I think we should use it as an opportunity to have a national conversation about how taxation has been used to get African people off the land into the mines, right? We've got to have those bigger conversations. How Switzerland, if they are reluctant, to bring out this idea that they actually impoverished many of our countries, because Hajun Cheng did a study where he compared DRC with Indonesia, and he says that they're similar to GDP in the 1960s, but our crooks put their money in Swiss bank accounts, right? And so what I'm saying to you, we need to try and have a clear map as a campaign, who is with us and who's not with us, so that we can begin to determine the tone and tenor for how to pressure those countries. If they are with us, we need to ambagatle, as they say.
The campaign, the Make It Happen campaign. Yes, Reverend.
Okay, thank you. I'm Reverend Henrietta Mgo from Zimbabwe Council of Churches, and I wanted to make my contribution as follows. I wanted to talk about tax dodging. These big companies that are dodging tax, and I'm saying the church can be a moral voice to influence these big mining individuals who sit in our churches. To influence the goodness of paying tax and partner with God in poverty reduction at grassroots level. With that contribution, I think if it starts from the church at local level, it will cascade even to partner with the UN tax convention. Thank you.
They come to our churches. Yes.
Thank you very much, Janet. Let me speak in Portuguese, please. Eu sou Filomeno Vieira Lopes, sou angolano e membro do Chota Angola. Esta questão da Convenção e que está ligada aos financiamentos ilícitos é uma questão que é muito complexa. Eu ia só colocar duas questões e também um pequeno comentário. O comentário é que nós temos duas atitudes no mundo em relação aos impostos. Temos uma atitude europeia, americana, que é uma atitude muito rígida e que os impostos são bem controlados e tudo é aproveitado de facto para que os Estados tenham bastante dinheiro. Há uma atitude africana que é uma atitude de grande relaxamento. E não é só a questão dos fundos que saem ilicitamente da África, mas há também todo um sistema de incentivos que permite que muitos rendimentos não fiquem em África. É uma boa notícia quando ouço dizer que nesta convenção os impostos serão taxados ali onde existem os recursos, porque no domínio petrolífero, quando nós tecnicamente calculamos o suplemento petrolífero, nós verificamos que é uma grande dose de impostos europeus e americanos na composição do preço dos derivados do petróleo. Enquanto que, normalmente, em África, os países produtores até subvencionam o preço do petróleo. Em Angola, por exemplo, o sistema de incentivos é tão bom para as multinacionais que se nós tivéssemos um imposto de $1 por barril de petróleo que é exportado, o imposto de exportação, teríamos cerca de $1.500.000 dia. E isto não se faz. Então, neste contexto, eu gostava de perguntar às instituições africanas que estão aqui, porque os incentivos fiscais que normalmente os países fazem é para atrair investimento. Portanto, contra outros países também africanos que produzem. A visão mineira africana tentou resolver este problema, mas a visão mineira africana, como vimos nas intervenções dos oficiais africanos que estiveram aí, não tem nenhuma maneira de forçar os países a cumprir esta visão. E o que eu queria perguntar é se as instituições africanas estarão capazes agora, com este propósito da Convenção, diminuírem ou influenciarem para que estes incentivos não continuem. A outra questão para perguntar à senhora Emma é se há alguma, para terminar, se há alguma novidade relativamente aos paraísos fiscais, porque é lá também que muita corrupção se faz. Esta convenção vai ao ponto de eliminar ou não estes paraísos fiscais. Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for those very critical questions. I think we've touched on them. I would like to come to the panel, and because of time, you will respond to the questions as your parting shots as well. Just speak on questions that were directed to you or that are of interest to you. But I also have two questions here. One is, how can we gather, this was from online, how can we gather the support from CSOs communities to avoid making the UN tax convention only a matter of experts? I think when you're talking about taxation and tax justice, we have elevated it at that level. And there was a question online on YouTube to say, how are we going to make it a community issue, a citizens issue, and not an expert issue? The second question is on, is the UN tax convention the silver bullet for addressing the tax failures and lack of fiscal justice for many African countries? We are all saying we want it. Is it the silver bullet? So I think the panelists can also address this, but it's also food for thought. It's for us to take for our refreshments as well to keep the conversation going. So have the panelists give your 1 minute parting shot and answering to the questions, key questions, and I'll call on Evelyn to give us the way forward from our conversation.
Yeah,
Let it-
thanks a lot. Just quickly, yeah, on Tusu's question, what can we do in the interim? I think, yeah, I think there are quite a number of things that are ongoing, and I think that civil society should push on. One is, this aspect of secrecy jurisdictions, disclosure of beneficial owners, and ensuring that governments actually exercise their tax audit rights. They need to have the capacity to audit. In some cases, that is not there. So where the capacity is there, where the capacity is not there, I think it should be built up, and where it's there to actually exercise those tax audit rights. I think I always say the example of Uganda, the Office of the Auditor General, very thorough, high capacity office on cost audits in the petroleum sector, and they've disallowed, for example, costs where companies inflate those costs, because the inflation of the costs obviously has an impact on the profit that is then remitted. The last point I was just going to make is that some of it is really basic stuff. I think AITA disclosures in Nigeria, for example, showed that 77 companies in 2020, the 2020 report, 77 companies were owing 6.8 billion US dollars to the federal government. After those disclosures, I mean, Senate then called these companies, there was a process and so on and so forth. The number went down, of those 77, the number went down to 55, and the money that was recovered, the money that was still owed in 2021 was 3.8 billion. So it came down, but still, these are huge sums of money that are essentially unremitted tax. So part of it is just addressing issues around administration. Then my parting shot, because you asked for that, I think, yeah, I have a lot of hope, but also, increasingly as well, it's challenging in some respects, because when I look at, I was attending the mining Indaba, France, Canada, the UK, the US, I can't remember who else, have all already developed critical minerals. Oh, wow. Critical minerals strategies, critical raw materials, whatever strategies for the energy transition. Much of those resources are located in Africa.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how many African countries have actually developed a strategy. So yes, we are debating around the energy transition and all this, because the tax has to come from these resources. But I feel that sometimes the African governments, our leaders, sometimes do not move as fast as they should on some of these issues. So I think it's a challenge for us. Thank you.
Honorable Hendricks, your parting shots. Any response?
Yeah, thank you very
A
much.
minute.
There are three very important toolkits. This one, the United Nations Tax Convention. We've got a toolkit on illicit financial flows. We have a toolkit for the 14-year plan for the intercontinental trade in Africa. But we forget the lessons of the founding fathers of Africa. How are we going to achieve all of this? And what did they say? That you need the United States of Africa, because individual African countries, even Kenya, will achieve nothing at the United Nations. It's only when all African countries are together, let's say like the European Union, that we can flex our muscles. How are we going to flex our muscles to achieve what I believe will be the first three items on the first meeting of the United States of Africa, the UN Tax Convention, illicit financial flows, intercontinental trade. So we have the agenda, but we don't have a United States of Africa. So when we go to the United Nations, we're going to represent our individual countries. Even the OAU may be there, but you know how divided they are. And we're not going to achieve anything. So there needs to be a parallel process while we're busy with these toolkits. I call it toolkits. There may be another one too emerging. We have to work very hard to get a United states of Africa and have a setup like the European Union where we can flex our muscles, all 54 countries of Africa, then there's power. Don't talk to me about morals. How can you believe that conglomerates will be influenced by moral values, by interfaith and all of that? They will never come to the party. You have to use power
Thank you,
to sort them out.
Honorable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's no longer the OAU. They actually removed the O because it's not organized. It's divided. Your
Yeah,
parting shots.
thank you for so many interesting thoughts. I have taken notes. I just, yeah, I can say that I don't think a UN tax convention will be a silver bullet, but I think it will solve some serious problems. And I don't think it will be easy to achieve, but I think it's possible. And I also can say that it's impossible to know when we will have it. When we look at other conventions, it's examples of conventions that have taken months to negotiate, examples of negotiations or conventions that has taken many years. So it varies a lot. And also it's impossible to say something about what's in the convention because the states haven't started the negotiations. But that's why it's so important that we involve and try to influence and try to get the negotiations to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bishop, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. One of the responses about how can the faith leaders provide moral authority for corporate companies which are evading tax, and it is possible to do that. But charity begins at home. The faith leaders need also to make sure that they pay tax whenever they are required to pay tax, because some of them, I've got a case in my country where we go and ask for exemptions, and they have brought in luxury cars in the country which have not been paid tax, but for personal use, not for the faith, but for the personal use. So I think it is important to set it home. But the last one, what can be done? Because one of the person asked, when is it going to happen and what can be done? It is a process, and we have to start organizing ourselves, talking ourselves, discussing ourselves, collaboration and engagement to see how can we reduce the poverty and how can we reduce the inequality within the community.
And make it a people's conversation.
Thank you very much. Is the UN Tax Convention a silver bullet? I think no. I explained that I'm afraid it may be a paper tiger. How to make a UN Tax Convention a community issue? I think we have to look at it from a domestic resource mobilization perspective, widening the tax base. If we have a lot of taxes at our disposal, we can be able to solve our issues as young people. And then when the tax convention can be achieved, probably before Jesus comes back, then my parting shots is that of course it is possible. I think it will be achieved, but as young people, I think, and especially when it comes to the input, I think the issues of tax harmonization are very, very important among the different countries because we are moving into regional trade. So I think for young people, it is very, very critical for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the parting shots. I think I had a great panel. Can give a hand to my very, very diverse, dynamic, and very knowledgeable panel. I can release you while I call on Evelyn from Tax Justice Network Africa. There are so many issues that were coming out already in terms of what we would want to see in terms of civic engagement, in terms of campaign, in terms of the global level, the national level, parliament, and the like. Evelyn, may I just call on you to give us what is it, what's the direction and the pathway at the African level from the Tax Justice Network Africa when it comes to this issue? Is right, yeah? Yeah, you can just, yes. You're released.
Um, Unfortunately, I get to speak at the tail end when I know your energies are low, but I'll keep it very brief. I think, sorry, the podium always, I'm very short. I think we need to understand the enormity of what has just happened. The struggle to get a UN tax convention began 20 years ago. And the importance of having a UN tax convention is that, let me exaggerate, since the advent of time, the rule makers, when it came to issues of international taxation, have been the rich countries. And yet, they're the ones who really abuse tax rules. They're the ones who are the tax abusers, as proven by the tax justice reports, the state of tax justice reports. So essentially, what you're having is you're having the rule makers, you're having the thieves, in quotes, being the rule makers of the international tax framework. It's similar, I would say, to how within the mining in Daba, it's the huge multinational enterprises that are coming together to discuss how they will plunder the resources of African countries. So in the same manner that that has been happening for quite a lot of time, is the same manner in which rich countries were the rule makers within the international tax framework. And so African countries, developing countries for a very long time, kept trying and trying to fight for a more inclusive framework, a more inclusive body that would set the rules of international taxation and that will drive the process of international tax reform. So this began back in 2001 when we were calling for an international tax organization, but it was rejected. It also happened back in 2014. It happened also in 2021. Nigeria actually tried to table a resolution to set up a UN tax body, a UN tax convention, and it was rejected. And in 2022, finally, despite a lot of pushback from powerful countries like the United States of America, we managed to get it passed. I don't think we understand the enormity of that. So this is 20 years worth of work just to get a resolution. So to answer your question, Mutuso, quite honestly, I think it's going to take another 20 years. But let me be bright. Let's be positive. We are the beneficiaries of civil society work that was started 20 years ago. The beneficiaries of the kind of work that we are doing are not going to be us. It's going to be the future generations. So even if we don't see the benefits of this work in our lifetime, there's still a whole lot of value in doing it. And I want to tell you, and I feel like the role of civil society is really sidelined when we talk about the UN tax convention and the passing of that resolution. It was civil society organizations, specifically African civil society organizations, that kept pushing for it when they thought we were mad. The OECD sincerely thinks African civil society organizations in the tax space are mad. We kept pushing for it and pushing for it and pushing for it. And not only did we rally African civil society organizations, we also collaborated with other civil society organizations in other developing countries. So there was a lot of South to South collaboration, and we really empowered and supported the campaigners and the people at the UN bodies in order for them to have the courage and to have the momentum to pass this specific resolution. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of power in the kind of work that we do. Even if we don't have access, for instance, to sit at this United Nations General Assembly meetings, there is a lot of value to it. And I think this is a perfect case study of what we can do when we come together with one voice and demand for action to take place, even if it will take arguably 20 or so years for us to actually see change. So my role is to tell you about the way forward. Firstly, we need to make sure that these countries that pass this resolution put their money where their mouth is. So they need to allocate the proper financial resources towards the exercise of coming up with a UN tax convention and with setting up a UN-led tax body that will set the rules for international taxation for the whole world over. The other thing that we need to do is we need to put pressure on our governments at national level. And I know that the honorable member here can attest to it. In a lot of financial issues, specifically in a lot of international taxation issues, the parliamentary role is normally ousted. They're normally sidelined in the processes of deciding on the rules of how to engage with international taxation. We need to empower Parliament to keep overseeing that process, to be involved in that process, because they are the custodians of public interest when you compare with the other bodies, the Ministry of Finance and whoever. They are the ones who are actually elected, at least in most African countries. And so we need to empower them to call the shots in these processes, to exercise their legislative and oversight roles. The other people whom we actually really need to work with is the tax administrations. There's a panelist here who spoke about the African Tax Administration Forum. They have a lot of technical capacity, but what they don't have is any political might. They don't have any political might, which is why they needed the voices of civil society organizations to push them forward and provide them with that momentum. So we need to work with our tax administrations at national level to keep pushing that, first of all, they ensure that there's a lot of stakeholder engagement in the decisions on how to get involved in the international tax framework. And secondly, to adopt the approaches, to adopt the positions that work for us as African countries. The other thing, of course, is producing good research, such as what NCA has done. And the other thing, and this is very important, we need to speak with one voice. We need to mobilize. We need to work together. There's no winner or loser. As civil society organizations, it needs to sound monotone. It needs to be one voice, very loud voice, calling for reform in the international tax framework, and not that in many other spaces, such as human rights. Of course, we need to speak with one voice, and I really do encourage you to get involved in the various movements that are taking place. I know our banner is back there, but Tax Justice Network Africa has really been trying to rally civil society organizations in this particular area, and we hope to continue doing so with your support. Unfortunately, I don't have, okay, we have a website, but please feel free to also reach out to me to get more information on how we can do this. Thank you very much. That's been my time. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Woo, yes. Thank you very much, Evelyn, for that. I think she's wrapped it up really nicely. Key points, action points already coming out. And we'd said that we'd want to come up with our own communique from the side session or position paper. And I think all these issues, she's wrapped them up. I have nothing else to say about it, except we need the rapporteurs who are taking it to do the draft, share with us, and we see how we're going to conclude on that. NCA and its partners have invited you for refreshments upstairs. I don't know if there's any other housekeeping issues you want to bring to our attention. Otherwise, we're going to the rooftop, and the partners that are inviting you tomorrow for a side session around just transitions. It's a breakfast meeting in venue 1 and 2. If you're interested in that, between 8 and 10. Otherwise, this has been great. I think very participative and interactive. Let me thank our panelists. Let's thank the NCA and its partners, and you for holding on. And we're 18 minutes into your time, and this has been great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed moderating this. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.